This episode is sponsored by Liza Nash Taylor's new novel, In All Good Faith, and the link to purchase it is in the show notes. Author Jane Healy raves. Liza Nash Taylor's Depression-era novel, In All Good Faith, is a beautifully written story about the power of perseverance and resiliency in the hardest of times. Healy adds, meticulously researched with rich detail and strong female characters that you root for, I loved this story and know it will delight Taylor's current fans and is sure to gain her many more. I also did a Q&A with Liza on my site's blog if you want to learn more about the book, and In All Good Faith is available now wherever books are sold. This is the Thoughts from a Page podcast, which is now a member of the Evergreen Podcasts Network. My name is Cindy Burnett, and each episode I interview authors about their latest works, or others in the book world about their roles, what those roles entail, and the books they love. For more book recommendations, check out my earlier episodes and my website, thoughtsfromapage.com, and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Thoughts From a Page. Thanks to Maggie Garza of HTX Real Estate Group, as well as Liza Nash Taylor, author of In All Good Faith, for sponsoring this episode. Today, I am chatting with Samantha Specks about Dovetails in Tall Grass. Samantha is a licensed independent clinical social worker. She and her husband live in Houston with their baby Pippa and her fur baby Charlie. When not in Texas, they enjoy spending time on the lakes of Minnesota and in the mountains of the Roaring Fork Valley in Colorado. Dovetails in Tall Grass is Samantha's debut novel. Currently, she is working on Dovetails of a River, which is set at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. I loved Samantha's book and selected it as one of my September Buzz Reads picks for the Buzz magazines. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And now for a quick break. For the last year, I have been focusing more on my health and eating habits. In connection with that, I have started drinking AG1 in the morning. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my health and energy levels. That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. I recommend AG1 to all of my family and friends because the company has a team of doctors and scientists. It is tested for 950 contaminants and is NSF certified for sport. It is formulated based on the latest science, and it maintains high quality standards. Thanks AG1 for sponsoring my show. AG1 is a supplement I trust to provide the support my body needs daily. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. That's drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. Check it out. And now back to my show. Welcome, Samantha. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Cindy?
I'm doing well too, and I am so excited to talk about Dovetails in Tall Grass. I know we have been speaking a little bit about this book for quite some time because I knew you before the book was even headed out into the world.
Yeah, it's so lucky how we had a connection and we're practically neighbors.
I know, so that's very fun. Well, I loved the book and actually wrote a blurb for it, so I know it's fantastic. But for those that have not read it yet, will you just give me a quick synopsis?
Sure. Dovetails in Tall Grass it's a fictional story about the U.S. Dakota War of 1862, which resulted in the largest mass execution in United States history on one side of the war. And then the other side of the war actually resulted in the largest civilian mass casualty event until the events of September 11th. And so from that history, I kind of started to understand and interpret it through the lens of two women. And so the story is told from the perspective of two young women on each side of the war who are tied through the fate of one man.
How did you learn about the story? And then how did you become interested enough in it to want to write about it?
Yeah, so I actually became interested in it due to my own kind of personal random encounter. And it was back in high school. So almost 20 years ago now, I think. And my family is from Minnesota and my grandparents are from southern Minnesota on the plains and prairie, kind of very farmland, rural area. And I was driving with my parents on a Christmas Eve to my grandparents' house and kind of making the last turn on a country road as the snow was blowing over. It was just so cold. I vividly remember this. And we crossed paths with a group of men riding on horseback, and they had settled and made camp for the night and had some fires going and a teepee and all these horses tied out. And I asked my parents, just, who are these people? What is this? Because I'd never encountered that before. And it was Christmas Eve and dark and cold. And my mom said that they were marching to show that they hadn't forgotten a war that had happened here a long time ago. And I had never heard of this war or this history, but it sparked me and my interest. And I just started to learn as much as I could. And that's when I educated myself about the US Dakota War of 1862 and all that happened in southern Minnesota at that time, kind of in the shadow of the Civil War. It was the first of the Plains Indian Wars. I started researching it on my own. And then when I was actually in grad school for getting my master's in clinical social work, I started to research a historical injustice, and I chose the US Dakota War as my topic. And so that kind of helped me dig into some of the scholarly pieces and that have been written on the topic. And my interest just grew and grew. And finally, I wrote the story that I felt like I had been called to. And yeah, here we are. And Dovetails and Tall Grass is coming out in August.
Well, when you tell people about the story, are many people familiar with it?
No, really, they're not familiar with this time in history at all. And it's so funny because I was traveling with my husband for work actually in Singapore last year. And we were out to dinner at one of the partners' homes, and the topic of my book came up, and there were different people at the table from different places all around the world. And no one was familiar with the US Dakota War. And they apologized because they said, "Oh, we can't believe we're not familiar with this time in history. It seems so important." And I was like, don't worry, don't worry. And now as I talk to people in Texas about my book, many people say, "Oh, we're not familiar with this time in history. We apologize. Like, it's so interesting. We want to learn more." And then when I talk with people in Minnesota, they'll say the very same thing. And even talking with people in New Ulm where the war happened, they'll say, "Oh, I heard something about that, but I don't know if I really know everything that happened back then." So it's such an important time in history and has all these massively important things attached to what occurred during the war. But people aren't really familiar with it. So that's why I felt so compelled, and I couldn't let this go as far as my interest. The more I dug into it, the more it mattered to me. And I really hope that got to the page for readers and brought it to life in a way that's compelling and helps more people learn about this time.
It definitely was incredibly compelling. I still think sometimes about different images you portrayed of some of the Native people walking and being moved and the war generally. It was such an interesting story, and I knew absolutely nothing about it. And I wonder, is that because of the subject matter, or is that because of the Civil War? Or what do you think is the reason behind people not knowing?
Yeah, I would guess the main reason it gets lost is because it happened during the Civil War. And so most of the attention goes to that time period. And I think it's kind of a shameful time in United States history and is somewhat complex and messy and just has a lot of hard pieces about it. So maybe it's been looked over in that way as well. And I just feel like in some ways, Native American history in general has been left out of a lot of important conversations.
I think that's exactly right. And I think not only Native American history, but many other people's history. And we're just in the process of trying to understand that and maybe put some of these stories back into our timeline so that people are a little more familiar with them.
Exactly.
Well, can you tell me about your research?
Yeah, so I guess my research ranged in so many ways, from just like my own personal interest in reading different historical books to, like I said, the academic research and reading scholarly articles to, I would find it helpful to even be on like page 7 of some old history message board, reading different users and their comments and interpretations of the history and different opinions of what happened. That was a lot of my basic research. And then I also spent time in southern Minnesota where the war happened. And the Brown County Historical Society actually puts on a series of events every single year in New Ulm and the surrounding countryside. And the Lower Sioux community collaborates as well for the more Native American perspective of those times. And they have educational events and speakers and other authors and history tours. So I've gone to quite a few years of that and met wonderful people and found it so helpful to be standing in the place where that war happened and really see it and see the buildings and meet all the other people who have been impacted by this history. And the research was wonderful and so fun. And in some ways, when I look back at when I started to write the book, I'm like, wow, I had no idea of what it meant to translate the actual history into a compelling story. Like, it's a very different thing to know something with your brain versus translating it into compelling characters that are going to draw a reader in and make them root for their journey and ultimately have it matter to a reader at the end of the day.
Absolutely, because you're writing fiction. So you really do have to have that story arc and character arc and translate, like you said, history into something that people are going to want to be turning the pages and understanding what's happening and feeling invested.
Yeah, my editor really was helpful with me on that when I was first writing. And I was so excited to get every single factoid and every single part of the war onto the page. And at the end of the day, she really helped kind of rein me in and and say, like, wait a minute, just focus on the characters. And once I did that, that's where I think the true fire of the story kind of lit and caught on. And I found the way to weave the character's journey with the actual history and I think draw a reader in that way. And I was still able to sneak in my factoids as far as like the weather on a certain day of history or a street's name or something or a tool that Onakika used. There's just all different ways I could weave it in a way where it didn't have to be dull to a reader.
Right, or read like a treatise.
Yes.
Yeah, instead you have a very compelling story with characters and then you are able to put in all sorts of historical details that are really interesting, but you don't feel like you're reading a history book.
Mm-hmm.
What surprised you the most about your publishing journey?
That's a great question. Boy, on the one hand, I would say it surprised me to deal with rejection and bluntness. And I think something that makes me an effective writer is I'm empathic and I take the perspective of other people and I care and things deeply matter to me and move me. But in that way, it makes me have somewhat thin skin for the amount of rejection and no and blunt honesty and how this story is definitely not a fit for every single person, or some people just aren't going to like it or don't care for historical fiction. So I'd say in that way, some of the publishing journey has been hard or just something to get used to. That's very different. So the author me versus the writer me have to be very different people. And yeah, I've just had to get thicker skin. And then on the flip side of that, I think the connection with the readers and just different people, especially in the historical fiction community, oh my goodness, like the level of support and enthusiasm and even talking with people like you, Cindy, is just so wonderful and I've been so alone in this story and in the writing process in my brain and on my laptop and in my words and my pages and alone in this manuscript for years. And so opening it up and opening up myself to others has been so awesome and just like one of the most neat things personally and professionally I've ever experienced.
It is such a wonderful community. And so I think when you get to the point that you're at now where the book is actually going to be going out into the world, it's so much fun because like you said, you're interacting with these readers who are loving your story. You're going to be meeting all these other authors and just different people, booksellers, whoever it is. And that's really wonderful.
Yeah, it's been so neat. And just especially after the pandemic, I think reconnecting with the world and with readers and people of similar interests and just getting out there, it's so fun to see people again, isn't it?
I think it's so much fun. And I just think books are something that you can talk about with anyone. And I think that sometimes, pre-pandemic, when I would just sit down at a lunch and wouldn't know anybody at the table, if I was speaking or whatever it was. And, the second you just say, what have you read lately? You have an hour of conversation that just everybody starts talking about what they've read, what they like to read. But I just think it's such a wonderful unifying thing.
It really is. It's so fun. And I think it's interesting. I just saw book sales are up 21% for the year, and they weren't really expecting it and don't know what to attribute that to exactly. A rise in 20% in sales is a pretty big number. And I was just trying to figure out, like, what is that from and what's going on? And I was talking with my dad actually about it. We were like, maybe it's from people traveling and just getting re-energized and back out in the world. You want to pick up that book. You want to have more that goes with you and adding on your Kindle and you're on the go and you're stopping by a bookstore. So maybe it's picking up because of that, which is, I think, just an optimistic and happy thing to see that we're kind of through something with the pandemic.
I agree completely. Because so much of publishing was messed up by the pandemic. I mean, independent of all of the other things that COVID messed up, I mean, in terms of truly the supply chain, getting books printed, getting them out the door, warehouses weren't open, factories weren't open, everything was just so delayed for a while. So I think, I agree with you. Optimism and also just the availability again.
Totally.
What about the title and the cover? How did those come about?
Yeah, the title, we went back and forth and I debated and Dovetails and Tallgrass. I wanted something that was balanced because my novel is told from the perspective of a settler woman and a Native American woman. I wanted something that really equally represented them both and wasn't too one-sided. So I toyed with a lot of things, But I thought dovetails was just a nice word that had a feminine connotation, and a dovetail is a joint that when it's cut correctly, the pieces fit together perfectly and it becomes a very solid connection point. And so I just thought that fit and paralleled with the core message of the novel. And then the cover, I went back and forth quite a bit with my publisher on this piece. And ultimately, I'm really, really happy with where the cover got to be. And it's a soft kind of sage green color. And again, kind of like this gentle feel to it. I don't know, something a little bit soothing. I don't know why. I wanted to have that feel. We were looking at something a little more old timey, I guess, because of the historical fiction piece. We thought maybe readers would like that. But I just feel like there's something about the message of my novel and the social justice piece, the women's issues piece, the historical injustices that I try to bring to the page, that I wanted it to have a little bit more of a modern feel, because I feel like the modern reader, when they're going through this novel, will really see some of the trends and the conversations and the hard elements of American history that we're talking about today. I think they'll see those brought to the page. So there was something I wanted to not feel too outdated with the cover. And I think we got there with what it looks like now.
I think so too. Well, I know it took a very long time to get this one out into the world, so I hate to even ask this question, but are you working on anything at the present?
Yeah, I am. I'm currently writing the sequel to Dovetails in Tallgrass, and it's tentatively titled Dovetails of a River. And it's where the story kind of meets and converges again at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, which is famous for Custer's last stand. And it would be historically accurate that people that could have been at the U.S. Dakota War of 1862 in southern Minnesota, some people were also at the Battle at the Little Bighorn. So I am just loving the research for this. I'm about halfway through writing it, and I'm feeling really good about it. And I can't wait to talk with readers about the next one.
Oh, that's so exciting. And I did not even know that.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, what do you like to do when you're not reading or writing?
Oh, goodness. Well, as I told you, Cindy, before we started recording, I had a baby in October. So getting used to mom life and hanging out with Pippa has been amazing. We spend a lot of time in Minnesota with family and on the lakes up there. And we also spend a lot of time in Colorado, staying in the Roaring Fork Valley. And we do a lot of hiking and fishing. And yeah, just love Colorado.
Especially in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
I love to get away from the Houston heat by going there in the summer.
Yes, us too. That is the game plan. Where do you go?
We go to Estes Park.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, the YMCA has a facility there, a huge group of cabins and horseback riding and hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park. And there's just a lot to do. So the kids love it.
Oh, that is the best.
Yeah. And where do you go?
We go to the Roaring Fork Club. It's just outside of Basalt, kind of near Aspen. And it's where Marcus and I got married. And we spend a few weeks there every summer and fall.
Oh, got it. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Well, what about what you've read recently that you really liked?
Ooh, I've got a few good ones that I've read recently. I would say one that I've listened to that I loved, because I just love listening to memoirs or celebrity memoirs, is The Wreckage of My Presence by Casey Wilson. She had a brief stint on SNL and she was on shows like Happy Endings. I think she's on Black Monday now, but The Wreckage of My Presence is a series of essays, and it makes you laugh out loud. But then also throughout the course of the novel, the memoir, you realize it's an ode and a kind of a love letter to her mother who's passed away. And it's just so moving, and their relationship is so vivid. I just found it very powerful and well written, and always even more so when a story moves you, but it also makes you laugh out loud. So that book by Casey Wilson. Historical fiction, I really enjoyed One for the Blackbird, One for the Crow by Olivia Hawker. It's a little bit more literary, and it's set, I think, in the 1870s in eastern Montana Territory, and it's about two families on the plains that have an incident happen between them, but ultimately have to come together to survive a winter in the harsh conditions of Montana and what happens between them. It's very compelling and just so beautifully written. So I would say pick up the actual book, physical book for that, because I just liked looking over passages, and Hawker is such a phenomenal writer that I really enjoyed that one.
I still have that, but it's big. And so, I just haven't ever taken the time to tackle it, but I've heard nothing but really good things about it.
Yeah, she's a great writer. And then the other one I wanted to mention is, have you read The One by John Mars?
I haven't. I know what you're talking about, but I haven't read any of his books, but I, again, hear they're really good.
Yeah, I liked it. It says it's more of like a thriller, and I guess there is a serial killer in it, but it's about like if there was basically like a match.com for your soulmate and you find it by submitting your blood DNA. And if your soulmate has also submitted theirs, you get paired. And it's just, I thought it was a little bit thrillery, but also just like the ethical questions it poses. And then also this thought of love and free will, and can you like someone or love someone, and what do you make work and what don't you, and what did you know about someone you thought you loved and yourself. It made me think about things and relationships differently. So I enjoyed it, and it was such a page turner. There's really short chapters and you can just cruise through it.
I remember when it was all over Instagram, and then I remember when it was at the bookstore when I was working there, and I was always curious about the cover, but I didn't know what it was about. But now that makes sense that the cover looks the way it does, with kind of the white with the blood splatter everywhere. Isn't that the cover for that one?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And then I'm currently reading, per your recommendation, The Hostage by Clare Mackintosh.
Are you liking it?
I am, and I'm 75% of the way through it. And I flew yesterday from Minneapolis to Houston, and I was like, I'm not going to crack this one open on the flight.
Yeah, that's not one I'd want to read while I was flying.
No, for sure not. And I just downloaded on audiobook You'll Grow Out of It by Jessie Klein. Have you read that one?
I have read that, and I liked it.
You did? Okay. All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I read it, but it was a long time ago. I mean, it's been out for a few years, right? 3 or 4 years?
I don't know, because I just keep hearing about it, and I don't know if I'm late or now if I'm seeing it that it's finally connecting the dots for me, or if it's a more recent. She used to be like a writer on SNL, and then I think she's on Amy Schumer's comedy team.
Yeah, I think I read it 3 or 4 years ago. I'm going to have to look it up, but it was really good. I mean, it's always nice to go back and pick up some of those because inevitably there's something I've missed.
Yeah.
So, well, good. Well, Samantha, I'm so happy that we got to speak, and thank you for coming on the Thoughts from a Page podcast.
Thanks for having me, Cindy.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not. It's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you like this episode, and I hope you did, please consider joining my Patreon as a page turner. Follow me on Instagram at Thoughts from a Page. Tell all of your friends about the podcast and rate it or subscribe to it wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it. The book discussed today can be purchased at the Conversations from a Page bookshop storefront, and the link is in the show notes. Thanks to Liza Nash Taylor, author of In All Good Faith, and Maggie Garza of HTX Real Estate Group for sponsoring today's episode. I hope you'll tune in next time.
Are you tired of seeing your teen or young adult struggle on a path that clearly isn't the right fit? Is your teenager confused about which direction to take after high school? The future of work is changing rapidly, and our kids need to know all of the options available after high school so they're empowered to make the choice that is best for them. In each episode, we explore the latest trends that are shaping the opportunities of today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Betsy Jewell, and this is the High School Hamster Wheel Podcast.